Movies like National Treasure chase legendary cities of gold. Real explorers did the same for centuries. What actually existed, and what was pure myth? For generations of Spanish administrators, the frontier north of New Spain held a magnetic promise. Reports circulating through colonial offices spoke of a region called Cibola, a territory rumored to contain vast wealth. This concept established a permanent Western focus in Spain's treasure geography, drawing maps toward unexplored territories. Spanish documents describe Cibola as a network of 7 distinct, prosperous settlements clustered together, rather than a single, isolated town. This specific 7-city structure drew on popular European folklore, projecting ancient myths of lost bishoprics onto the unmapped deserts of the American Southwest. According to these early Spanish accounts, these communities possessed riches that rivaled the grandest empires of the Southern Americas. Yet these descriptions existed entirely on paper, born of colonial ambition rather than physical evidence. To those planning the expeditions, the dry northern plains and canyons represented a blank space on the map, a wealthy prize waiting for imperial conquest. The Spanish map of treasures soon expanded past the borders of Cibola to include Quivira, a second destination placed even further east across the Great Plains. This paired set of rumors painted the northern territory as a broad zone of wealth instead of a single prize. Spanish officials expected this broad region to hold gold, silver, and valuable fabrics, ignoring the actual political structures of the independent native communities living there. By applying their own names and expectations to these areas, European cartographers merged the distinct realities of the Pueblo Southwest and the flat grasslands into one large, profitable empire. The expedition of 1540 set out to put these territorial claims to the test, with the southern Pueblo towns of Cibola serving as the first physical destination. In January 1540, Viceroy Antonio de Mendoza appointed Francisco Vázquez de Coronado to command the northern military force. Coronado assembled a massive, diverse column of roughly 300 European soldiers, several Franciscan friars, enslaved Africans, and over 1,000 Mexican Indian allies, including Tlaxcalan warriors. This heavy logistical train, dragging hundreds of livestock, marched north for months. In July 1540, the exhausted vanguard reached Huacu, the southernmost Zuni pueblo. Instead of golden walls, they found a town built of multi-story sandstone and sun-dried adobe. The Zuni lived by farming corn, beans, and squash, using spring-fed irrigation ditches. Their wealth existed in turquoise, pottery, and textiles, not precious metals. The encounter quickly turned violent. Coronado's officers read the requerimiento, a royal decree demanding immediate submission to the Spanish king and the Catholic Church. The Zuni responded with a horn blast and arrows. Outgunned and starving, the Spanish force launched an attack, drove the Zuni from the pueblo, and seized their food stores. The immediate victory offered no material reward. There were no golden streets, no silver-lined rooms, and no hidden treasures. Within weeks of occupying the pueblo, Coronado wrote back to Mexico, delivering his stark assessment. As far as he could judge, there was no hope of finding gold or silver in Cibola. The dream of easy plunder had evaporated against the reality of a stone farming town. Near the pueblo of Cicuye, Spanish soldiers took custody of a native captive they called El Turco. To his captors, this guide described a wealthy eastern land called Quivira, a place supposedly abundant in gold, silver, and fine fabrics. In the spring of 1541, Coronado led his army east, charting a path across the dry expanse of the Texas Panhandle and the Great Plains. The grueling march ended in present-day Kansas, the region associated with Quivira. The Spaniards did not find stone citadels. Instead, they encountered Wichita communities living in round, grass-covered structures surrounded by vast cornfields and buffalo country. These grass homes represented a deliberate adaptation to the Great Plains environment rather than primitive simplicity. But Coronado saw only the absence of precious metals. Suspecting that the guide had deliberately led the army into the wilderness to perish, the Spanish commanders ordered El Turco executed by garroting. With their illusions shattered and their resources depleted, the exhausted survivors turned back, finally limping into New Spain in 1542. Long before European maps projected fantasy kingdoms onto the southwest, the Zuni and neighboring Pueblo peoples developed highly organized, permanent societies centered on agricultural mastery. Prosperity here was measured in survival, sustainability, and community strength, not in gold. At the core of this system was the cultivation of maize, beans, and squash. To nourish these crops in an arid environment, Pueblo farmers engineered precise water management networks. They constructed spring-fed irrigation canals, routed seasonal floodwaters directly to desert fields, and built small check dams along arroyos to trap precious moisture. This style of farming required careful seasonal planning and coordinated communal labor, allowing settlements to produce massive food surpluses. These food reserves were safely stored in multi-story sandstone granaries, acting as a safeguard against prolonged drought. Outside of farming, Pueblo communities maintained vast regional trade networks. They exchanged turquoise, marine shells, cotton garments, woven textiles, and finely crafted pottery over hundreds of miles. These items held immense social and ceremonial significance, linking distant populations through shared resources. Coordinated production did more than provide food. It sustained active ceremonial lives, cemented alliances, and built resilient communities that thrived for generations in a challenging land. While the Zuni managed desert waters, other communities thrived under different ecological realities. Along the Middle Rio Grande, Tiwa farmers built multi-story adobe towns with dense populations, trading cotton textiles and crops. Further east, on the tall grass prairies, the Wichita constructed round, grass-framed homes, adapting perfectly to the Great Plains. The Wichita combined seasonal bison hunting with the cultivation of squash, beans, and corn. In these societies, assets were not measured by accumulated metal. True prosperity meant food security stored in underground caches, active exchange networks, and ceremonial relationships with the land. A beautifully woven mat or a successful hunt held great social and spiritual worth. Spanish observers, accustomed to measuring power in gold and silver, looked at this rich agricultural security and saw poverty, completely misinterpreting a highly organized, thriving world. Long before Spanish ships sighted the mainland, European cartographers mapped the Phantom Island of Antillia, a legendary sanctuary where 7 Christian bishops supposedly founded prosperous settlements to escape 8th century Moorish conquests. Conquistadors carried these deeply rooted expectations of hidden Christian kingdoms and Western wealth across the Atlantic. In 1356, Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca returned to New Spain after years of survival and travel among indigenous communities. His unusual resilience gave him immense credibility as an eyewitness, and his subsequent reports of large northern towns electrified colonial administrators. This intelligence rested on indigenous oral accounts and localized personal observations, leaving a vast gap between Spanish expectations and physical reality. Cabeza de Vaca's written testimony provided an influential narrative that fueled imperial ambitions, though it offered no actual physical evidence of gold. The Spanish treated these highly mediated second-hand accounts as absolute proof, setting a dangerous precedent for future exploration. In March 1539, Viceroy Mendoza sent Franciscan friar Marcos de Niza north to verify Cabeza de Vaca's accounts. Traveling with him was Estevanico, an enslaved Moroccan who had survived the Narvaez disaster. Estevanico served as a guide, his specialized geographic knowledge and personal agency heavily filtered through Spanish official records. As Estevanico forged ahead, he reached the Zuni pueblo of Hawiku, where local leaders killed him. Rather than entering the settlement, Niza observed Hawiku from a distant ridge. He returned to Mexico City with a report that transformed distant observations into legal evidence for expansion, claiming the smallest of the 7 cities was larger than Mexico City itself. This exaggeration entered an official amplification chain of translation, repetition, and imperial ambition. By reclassifying these sovereign agrarian communities as a wealthy prize waiting for conquest, Spanish institutions turned native inhabitants into obstacles. This manufactured confirmation provided the political justification to launch Coronado's military invasion. The 2004 film National Treasure presents a modern version of the age-old hunt, where fictional explorer Benjamin Franklin Gates follows a trail of historical clues to uncover a massive hidden vault. This adventure formula treats the past as a solvable puzzle, promising that hidden codes, concealed wealth, and meaningful geography will eventually yield physical riches. In this cinematic framework, the search relies on absolute secrecy, clever codes, and a final, spectacular discovery. The actual historical record of the Southwest tells a very different story. The historical search failed because of report distortion, exaggerated claims, and coercive military conquest, bypassing any secret keys or elite societies. The Hollywood narrative leaves no room for the real histories of the Zuni, Pueblo, or Wichita peoples. It omits the primary Spanish chronicles of Cibola and Quivira, replacing sovereign agricultural nations with generalized adventure settings. No indigenous characters or oral histories guide this fictional search. While the film preserves the excitement of finding treasure, it completely bypasses the living societies whose complex cultures, trade networks, and land stewardship were erased by the original Spanish myths. Hollywood asks where the treasure is hidden. History asks who created, benefited from, and was obscured by the story. Today, the Southwest's true wealth lives on in the enduring sovereignty of its indigenous communities. When we look past the myth of gold, we finally see the people who actually shaped this land. The real treasure was never lost. It survived. Share your thoughts in the comments.